putting on a show, I guess. Although I think that I just wouldn't be able to remember what show I was on and it just wouldn't go well. So like I just have to like do whatever it is I'm doing. And I do think like being funny um is natural to me, and I do think that that is some sort of survival technique and seeing the world in a slightly different lens as far as my way to consume it and digest it. I definitely think that some things that I do, or like being super friendly, I think somehow it's a survival tactic. I'm not sure why, but like you ask my child and she'll say, "Mommy's friends with everybody."
Constructing your life is about much more than just building a bank account. Each week, join mindset coach Austin Linney as he interviews guests who are constructing their dream lives and impacting the world around them on a daily basis. If you're an entrepreneur or wanting to start a business, or you just want to hear motivating stories of how others have overcome the odds, you are in the right place. And now for your host, Austin Linney.
Guys, welcome. You know, business brokers, there's like two that I found that I like. Clint's one of them. Now I finally have my second one. We have her in the house. We'll call like Mighty Mouse is like what I want to like call you when I saw you networking. It's like everybody's 6'5" and you're running around with the biggest smile on your face and the greatest energy ever. Even there's even energy coming off your emails. So we have Jackie in the house. How are you?
I'm well, Austin. Thank you so much for having me. Super fun. And yeah, there were some big dudes at that conference. I didn't know what was going on. I mean, even some of the women were tall. I don't know if they just ate differently than I did or it's a different gene pool. I'm always wondering, but I think my dad said I would be a little bit scary if I were 6'5". I'd be like, "Hey,
Yeah.
How are
I
you?"
heard that in your podcast. I don't think business would go as well for you because I think you would be. We have a new sales guy who's like 6'4",
Yeah.
ex-military. He's a presence.
Yeah.
So. So before we get started, kind of give a little brief background of who you are and what you do, and then we'll
Sure.
go off to the races.
My name is Jackie Hirsch. I've been selling companies for 26 years, which seems like a really long time. I mainly stay in the lower M&A side. I've sold, a bunch of Main Street over the years, and sometimes we'll do stuff like right now I'm working on a much larger deal in the 30 plus range. So, we do all sorts of different transactions, but then I also invest. So I'll invest on, small cap tables for deals, and I've invested in funds, venture and existing. I'm a Minds Capital investor and invested recently in Deep Work Capital, which is Florida's venture fund, run out of Orlando. So, we like a variety of investing, and that's really exciting. And it's just like business. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and you just have to kind of roll with it. It's risk, right? And we are not risk averse in that space, and we try and help our clients mitigate risk by really choosing a great business to buy. And I see my buyers and sellers out at conferences. I see them around town. I still keep in touch with many of them. Just got a call from a deal from one of my sellers in Nashville. So it's about building community ultimately. And as long as you have that in the forefront, you're always putting the right people with the right deal. It's about building.
I love that. I have a different question for you because I listened to the podcast again today with you and Nick to refresh myself. Who you are now, you have a reputation that speaks for itself, a track record. If you had to think back to that 26-year-old that started in this space, why do you think a seller went with you back then? When you had no track record and you were nobody and you were just trying to convince anybody to sell their business to you, why do you think they went back to you way back then?
No, that's a great question. I think, this is a controversial item. I use a lot of common sense. It's a controversial topic for whatever reason. So a lot of common sense. I'm really direct. I'm really upfront. I really try and use a lot of compassion. I remember when I started selling companies when I was 22, and one of the sellers started crying. And the broker I worked for at the time, he said that happens sometimes. And I just turned to the guy and said, this happens sometimes. Like, this is your creation. I mean, now I say it's a bespoke creation. I sell bespoke companies. but it's their creation, and now they're making such a huge life shift, just like a birth or a death or a marriage. There's a lot of ungluing and regluing that's about to take place. So I think it's a mixed bag of people trying to sort out their emotions, and there is no uh, class on that in school. Like, oh, how to deal with like major trauma and tragedy, right? That's how people sometimes get into trouble. How to deal with like massive loss or a seismic shift in your life or total betrayal. There's really no lessons on that except for life lessons. And of course, you should always be wary of unearned wisdom. That being said, why not prepare people? So we always talk about that. And maybe it was just disarming that I was just so direct and upfront. Like, hey, this does happen. And it happens to a lot of people, just people don't really talk about it. And there was one of my friends was selling an $80 million company, and he told me that the day before the seller was crying. And I said, well, it's so huge. And he just didn't know if he was doing the right thing, like getting $80 million now when he's 50, or trying to hold onto it and maybe double it. And you just don't know. Right.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times sellers see that the business has gone beyond their expertise. Either they need to bring somebody in or do dramatic shift, or they have to, it's time for them to let somebody else take it to the next level. I think those are really hard decisions.
So I am similar to you. I'm a deep empath, been that way since I was a baby, right? And so I had a lot of trouble in school. Dropped out of I got kicked out of 3 kindergartens, dropped out of college 3 times. So just school was always a testing for me.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter where I am in the country, doesn't matter what environment I am. I can tell you within 5 minutes whether somebody was a former teacher or not, or they're a current teacher.
Mm-mm.
Like I just understand that energy, how they behave. When I met you this past week, within 2 minutes, less than that, of us meeting each other, we were lockstep. We were good.
We were
We were comfortable, right? And so I would imagine that your clients in this biggest decision of their life, something that I would measure that 90% have never done before, having that level of comfort and kind of directness is actually refreshing. And I would imagine it's why you've been so successful in the business. Was that something that you have always had, or is that something that you cultivated? Or
Yeah, no, I've always been like a super friendly person. Like, my mom will mention like, oh, so-and-so asked how you're doing, and they see me very infrequently, but I really enjoy people. I think they're fascinating. I really think they're all so different, and I enjoy meeting people where they're at. And then you have to also know that some people won't like you, no matter what you are, what you do, or who you are, or how you treat them. And I still treat them the same. So I know that might be confusing to them, because I'm just still gonna kind of move forward with that. And I don't know, like that's just, and maybe that's why it's better for me to like live in a place like Orlando than maybe Manhattan, right? I don't know that spiritually my soul would be able to survive like that type of like abrasiveness. Or it's not an abrasiveness, it's like you have to have some sort of barrier because you're interacting with so many people all the time.
Yes. Yeah. My favorite thing to do in the entire world is to take an angry person and be like insanely happy and like optimistic, and they just can't take it because I'm just like, my favorite thing to do is like when we get an angry customer and like turn them into a happy customer. Like because we're having to ask ourselves the question, right? And this is going to get into my expectations talk. Is are we so worried about what we want out of the situation that we haven't heard what they want?
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, people just want to be heard, and nobody's being heard because we're all trying to, especially this day and age, trying to shove our point across the table.
Right.
And at the end of the day, people go, I have no idea how you could negotiate deals the way that you've done. And I was like, because I actually listened.
Yeah. I sold a company earlier this year. The seller, when we first met, was 78. He's like, oh, Jackie, I'm just not sure if I'm ready. I'm like, well, then let's not do this. Like, if you're still having fun and making money, like, let's wait. And most people would be like, you're 78 and you should be like sitting on a chair. This guy was still running marathons at 75. Like, he's still working, right? And he's like, well, I'm on the list for a 2024 Corvette. I'm like, well, what color are you getting? He's like, red, Jackie, red. There's no other color. I'm like, well, I would have gotten blue, right? Like, I love blue, so I would have gotten blue. And we just laughed about it. But when he was 81, he was ready. We sold it.
Yeah.
Right? He
Yeah.
just needed a little bit more time. And I was happy to like cheer him on. And he got his Corvette. It's red. It's beautiful. I'm sure he drives multiple girlfriends around in that Corvette. Like, he's just awesome. Like, this guy is just so fun. And again, it's like, that was a really interesting thing. He was from West Virginia, and the buyer was from Maine. And so I think I mentioned this story. So I said to him, you know what? I know what the buyer's problem is. He's like, really? What's his problem? I'm like, he's from Maine. And the seller stopped and he laughed. I'm like, and you know what your problem is? You're from West Virginia. That's his version. I said, I'm going to call him after this and tell him I know what your problem is, that you're from West Virginia. I said, because I think you both are super amazing people and really nice and quality people, both of you. Because if I thought he was a piece of trash, I would have been like, let's ditch this guy and find somebody else. We have other options. Like, we don't have to stick with this guy. And once we had that conversation, everything went so much better in that deal.
Regular, for a person who's been in a deal, you just described to me within 2 minutes of why you're so successful. Like, that right there. I hope everybody rewinds, because that right there is why you're so successful.
Well, I
because
appreciate that, Austin.
Getting them to understand, we had all the guys arguing about something. These are all our older techs who've been around for a while, and they're all blah, 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 blah each other. And I just stopped them and I said, what's the outcome we're seeking here, guys?
Yeah.
We want to make the customer happy. Okay, we all want the same thing. So let's stop talking amongst ourselves and figure out how to make the customer happy. Done.
Yeah.
Move on. Like, you're just saying, look, we don't have to sell this thing, but if you want to, you have to understand where he's coming from. He's coming from. Boom. So how do you go about managing expectations? Because not only do you have the buyer and the seller, but you have the vendors, you know, the lawyers, the QREs, so that you have those personalities, and they're trying to get their fees. So it's like the greatest jigsaw puzzle in the world.
Well, it's like a party, but people aren't having fun.
Yes.
So I
said this line, and I hope you were saying it too, because it's the greatest line in the world. I want shirts. It's a party.
Here's my deal team. It's a party. We're just not having fun.
It's a party, and we might not get any cocktails at the end either.
So, you want to support your deal team. They're people. Like, they're just people, right? So there's all sorts of humanity in a deal mixed with like piles of paper. Like, so there's piles of paper, humanity. I'm dealing with a bank right now. They do their checklist on a Word doc. There's no other way. Like, they do it on a Word doc, and then they do like different color things, and then they do the double line cross out, and then they add stuff. Like, you can't, it's like Morse code. Like, you've got a dot, dot, dash, dash, and like figure this out. It's bad. And so I'm selling this company for like $3 million, and this guy's like a former tech guy, sold and is now buying a brick and mortar roofing company. I was like, okay, wait till you see this show, right? I'm going to say chaos. I'm going to try and keep it clean. I'm going to say chaos, but you know what? There's really no other word for that type of show. Okay. So he's like, I can't believe this. I'm like, and I do tens of millions of deals with this bank every year, tens of millions. And I don't want to suggest anything because their rates are so good, and the deal is so good, and their working capital offering is so good, and their line of credit is so good. I'm afraid to like mix up their magic. Like, I feel like they have a big cauldron, and they're like, oh, I'll just put in like some eye of newt and like a witch fingernail, and like, this is what you get. But like, it's a great deal. So I think part of this deal structure is getting all the parties, just like you said, common goal. What's the outcome? The deal gets done. Or if all of a sudden it's not a good deal, the deal doesn't get done. I don't want to do not good deals, right? So you want to make sure that from front to back, start to finish, it's clean. And I made a joke with Clint Fiore that I like my buyer and seller, like holding hands and skipping to the campfire, ready to roast some s'mores together, singing Kumbaya, right? And he laughed and he's like, because he thinks sometimes like maybe they shouldn't like each other. And I don't think that way. I think that they should and see the good in each, right? Because they'll need each other at some point. At some point, the seller will be like, I need a schedule of something. I can't find it. Can you find this for me so I can file my taxes, right? At some point, the seller's going to need something, right? And the buyer will, of course, hey, you said that guy, John, who works at that company is a little glitchy, but he left and now it's some other person. I don't know what to do, right? So there's still going to be problem solving and deal making after the deal is done.
What has been the biggest unlock for me is knowing when to give certain type of information and when to save it. Like when I was, I'm so glad who I am now, gearing up towards 42 and soon. Because at 20, I want to tell everybody and their mother all the things I was going to do, and I was going to share. I share everything. And now I share like nothing. And I just share what that person needs to hear in that moment, right? And so the problem with a deal, like you're saying, is that a lot of times you have to find out what the actual, okay, perfect example. The one we bought, he cared about a number. He didn't care about the structure.
Right.
He didn't care about any of the things. He cared about a single number. And if that number didn't change, the 90 other things that involved in that didn't matter at all.
Right.
And so you had to clock that. And then you extrapolate and you say, okay, so does that number really matter to us? Well, not really in 5-10 years. So then we just leave that alone, and then we'll make all these other things great. But a lot of people, what I have an issue with, and this is one of my biggest things, and God bless them, right? They're new, they're trying to figure it out. But I find that people get so caught up in their underwriting and their spreadsheeting, and they're not looking at my favorite line in the entire world is common sense ain't that common. Because it's like there's a business. Let's look at the macro micro trends. Let's look, can you do this? Can you make it better? And then be careful about how much leverage you're putting on it. Like I had a mentor whose he went from 50 million to 1 billion in the HVAC space. He's done over 80 transactions, bought everything. He said, Austin, it's not that complicated. He said 1/3 cash, 1/3 owner finance, 1/3 bank. Close the deal, move on. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like you just simplified my entire my entire structure. How much do you play in on the business broker side is your job getting the seller ready to be realistic about what actually can get the deal done? How much is your job is on the front end part of that?
Well, there we go, with managing expectations. So I really try and do a realistic version. So there's this company I'm working on selling, and it'll probably sell for 20 million. And he's speaking with a bunch of business brokers. He's speaking with an investment banker. He's speaking with some M&A advisors, blah, 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 blah. It's all the same. All right. So I was the only one that really dissected what was going on with the deal. And he hired some consultant, and I met with him as well. That gave him a really honest opinion, frontwards and backwards, about the deal. So I can say, oh, we can definitely get this money, but there's some customer concentration. There's some heavy customer concentration. And I told him that that's my concern. And here's why I think you'll be on the lower side of the multiple because of this. And I did a full written analysis with some metrics, right? But conversationally. Right. So it's still like a conversation, not throwing them a chart. And then they're like, well, what do I do with this? Right. Let's talk about it. Here's where I think we'll be. Here's some possibilities. Here is where I think you'll win. Here's where people might come at you. But here's the reality. There are very few businesses like yours that are, have a 2.5 million EBIT, super clean books, team in place, right? But it's a little bit lean, a little bit of customer concentration. And when I say a little, a lot. And those elements will make it tricky, right? And he'll need to stay on, which is good. He's young enough. So he's young enough to stay on for a couple of years. And then we talked about, terms, what are you going to want? What do you want down? How much would you carry? Would you roll equity? What does that look like? Right. And then I joke, like, I'll put in my, sim, like, this seller is an apple eater. Because, I always think that, like, comment, like, the second bite of the apple is, like, so funny. So sometimes I'll just, like, write, like, the seller's an apple eater. And some people read it, some people don't, just
God,
like,
you're the
why not
best.
be a little bit funny?
I mean, you're the
And
best.
and so I just, like, and that's how I kind of approach things. Like, what we're doing is scary. Like, let's talk about it. Or even, my child, sometimes, we talk about being afraid of the dark. I'm like, oh, of course you're afraid of the dark.
Mhm.
And she's like,
Mhm.
well, why? I said, well, because you're smart. All the stupid kids, they ran away from the campfire and got eaten by the lion. You're smart. You're fine. Right. And so I'm like, okay, so let's dissect this. Like, and the same thing I do with my clients. Okay, so why are you afraid of the dark? And she's like, well, I could get murdered. I'm like, oh, definitely. Right. Okay. So I said, even though no one in the neighborhood has ever been murdered. So I'll just plant that seed. No one here has ever been murdered, but yes, it's a possibility. So what would that entail? That would entail two things: death, and it sounds painful. She's like, yeah. I'm like, which is scarier? She's like, oh, both. I'm like, okay. Well, remember that time you, like, fell over the front of your scooter and, like, mashed your face in? That seemed pretty painful. She's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. And you survived that. I said, in death, we won't come back from that. And we really can't control it. But that is the only guarantee in life, is that we will die. We have that one guarantee: we will die. And that's why it's so important to, enjoy every day. That's why I give you a big hug. And when you wake up, I'm like, yes, she's awake. Like, when my child wakes up, I'm so happy to see her. She awakened. It's a new day, and I miss her when she goes to sleep. Like, I love being with her. Like, we both do. So I think that managing those expectations, like, what are you afraid of? Shine the light. Like, shine the light. What's in the dark for the seller? What's in the dark for the buyer? They could lose everything. That's real. So let's talk about that. What does that look like for you? And you know what? I've been involved in that, right? Because when I was a kid, my dad had a business, and things didn't go well. And my dad did not declare bankruptcy. My dad paid back everybody.
Mhm.
But it was lean times for a long time. And I remember that very, very vividly. So, I think about, going through those scenarios with my buyers and sellers and preparing them, like, for hard conversations. And we have those hard conversations. And I think that that's just part of, like, doing the deal. But I hear that other brokers don't talk about any of this stuff, because
None
you
of it.
realize you have no idea, like, what other people do in their deals. And I hear some brokers, they, like, make an introduction and then collect a check. And I was like, well,
Mhm.
wow,
Yes,
maybe
I
that
know,
guy's
'cause
smarter than me.
I know,
I'm,
'cause
like,
I'm
working my
paying
butt
one.
off.
Yeah, I know, 'cause
Yeah.
I'm paying one. 6
Yeah.
figures for doing nothing. I did all the work.
Wow. Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
don't
working
worry.
my
It was
butt
supposed
off.
to be double 6 figures. I negotiated a half off
Wow.
because I'm me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's disheartening, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's the concern that I have. If you're, I'm obsessed right now with, like, searchers. Like, I think it's
Okay. It's
asinine.
fascinating.
I think it's so, and I use asinine in the most positive sense. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that these people convince their spouses to leave their job. And I said, look, if you sold your wife on working on, or your wife or husband working on your savings and not working, searching for a business, you've already won. You're already going to be successful. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but they also have a million questions for me. Should I have a website? Should I have a thing? You've dealt with enough buyers. You're dealing with sellers and buyers. What is your advice to those people that are out there looking or looking to make a shift? What they need to have
Yeah.
together before they get started?
I mean, first, I think they should go to a specific buyer boot camp if they didn't do ETA. I mean, there's some amazing buyer boot camps out there, and some are definitely better than others.
Mhm.
But yeah, you need to dial in, what you need to be prepared. You need to have the website. You need to have a summary of what you want. You need to be clear. You need to have already spoken with some lenders. You need to maybe drum up some anchor investors ahead of the deal, and get to know some people. Like, hey, if I have a deal, would you give me 50? Would you give me 25? Sometimes searchers like, oh, I won't take less than 100. I'm like, don't be afraid of those $25,000 checks. We did a deal for $7.5 million, and that buyer raised 25,000 checks, $250,000 checks. Like, it was across the board, 15 different investors. So I think people get really proud and, sometimes they just know everything, especially from certain Ivy League schools. They just know everything. And I couldn't possibly know anything because I've only sold 400 companies.
Yeah.
What could I possibly know? Right. I've only done 150 SBA deals. Like, what could I possibly know? Right. So I always think that that's interesting. I had a searcher who, of course, went to a big fancy Ivy League school. I won't say what it is because I'm sure there are nice people that go to that school. And he not only broke confidentiality, he went around both brokers, speaking with the seller directly. He like lied to the bank, like all sorts of different stuff. And I was like, wow, I was not expecting that. I blocked him from my phone. I mean, it was bad. It was really bad. And I hear he did buy a business, and I'm hoping that he's maybe turned a new leaf. That's what I hope.
So you, as you stated, you've done a lot of deals and you've learned a lot. But what do you think, for you, as you sit here today, what do you think has been your qualities or your values that have created success for you in your life, business and personal? Like, because when I speak to you, I'm not saying that you're not uncertain inside, from time to time, but there's no uncertainty in who you are as a person and what you stand for. So what do you think's cultivated that and kind of over the years that you learned about yourself?
I think, taking some hits, having some tragedies always helps. Like if you have like death, destruction, like, all sorts of things you have to overcome. So it's, we saw Chris Powers talk, and that was very interesting. And he was really in some serious, I couldn't believe what he had to deal with. And so I spoke with him later. I said, it reminds me of like when you have a tree that gets severely damaged and then it grows, like the bark heals a little bit, and that part is super strong. And I was speaking with the pray.com guys, and they really liked that. They were just thinking, you have to heal. And there's a psychological theory that if you're hurting, you hurt other people. Right. But I said, well, then that would mean if you're healing, then you're healing other people. So if you're in a constant state of healing and improving, I believe that rubs off on others. So if I lead my life with integrity and like, there was somebody at the conference was like, wow, you are like the most authentic person in person. Which was so funny. But I think if you like lead the life that you want to lead and like you present yourself the way you want others to present, that helps. But there's a problem I have. Like I can't help but be myself. Like I would be a terrible actress. Like I would be horrible. And this is what works for me, but some people find it direct. Some people might find it offensive. I always joke that I can't be offended, but I could maybe be offensive with my opinions and my beliefs. But it's still usually with a lot of love, like, or just asking questions like, hey, why can't we find out the ingredients in certain things being offered through a needle? Like, why not? Like, what's in that? How is it developed? But just asking that wasn't even popular. Or, hey, why do we always do it this way? Or like, hey, why were you yelling? Like, is there something going on? Or maybe to them that was them speaking loudly. I did ask that to one of my clients one time. They said, I don't hear well, so sometimes I think I'm just projecting. I'm like, oh, I'm glad you told me that. Like, I have really sensitive hearing. So I was like a bat in my past life or something. Like, I can hear everything. So I think just trying to ask questions and find out about people. But for me, I need to sleep at night. And I need to feel good about what I do out there in the world and the energy I put out there and what comes back. And I found that when you like put out a smile and like your genuine self, or like, hey, I don't like that. Or, hey, we're not doing it that way, and here's why. That gets you a lot farther than putting on a show, I guess. Although I think that I just wouldn't be able to remember what show I was on, and it just wouldn't go well. So like, I just have to like do whatever it is I'm doing. And I do think like being funny, is natural to me. And I do think that that is some sort of survival technique and seeing the world in a slightly different lens as far as my way to consume it and digest it. I definitely think that some things that I do, or like being super friendly, I think somehow it's a survival tactic. I'm not sure why, but like you ask my child and she'll say, "Mommy's friends with everybody."
Yeah. Yeah.
Why not? Why not be friends with everybody? I mean, is that so wrong?
One of my favorite other sayings is, "Be careful you don't bleed on the people that didn't cut you."
Yeah.
You know, and I think that, you know, so when I had to address the company for the first time that I was buying, it wasn't in the cards. I was not supposed to do it for 3 months. And then the seller's like, "How about we just do it today?" And I was like, sure. So I'm sitting there driving 30 minutes to the office, you know, vomiting inside on myself and just like, I don't know what to say. And so I stood up and I said, "Hi, I'm Austin. I'm going to be the new owner. I'm a former alcoholic. I'm divorced. Nice to meet you. And I used to be a drug addict." That's what I said. I swear to God, I'm not joking.
So what would they say?
They loved it. They were like,
Yeah.
6 guys came up to me and they're like, "Oh, us too. Awesome, man. Super excited." And I'm so me. This is what my fiance says about me. I'm so me that it freaks people out.
Yeah.
Like I'm so like everything that you keep in a closet hidden in the dark controls you. Right? And I have burned my life down probably about 10 times for many different reasons. And every time it's actually a blessing because I've been able to leave behind what I don't want anymore. And all I do is the next day you pick yourself up and you go back out and do it again. And
Right.
I think they, especially in business, right? Especially in this thing, you have to put a bow on it. You have two people on two different spectrums. You have a person looking to further their wealth and create impact and money, and then you have the person selling their life's work. And so you basically have like, it's like Thor. You have this thing colliding that has two opposite ends of the spectrum.
It's like the giant metal tower that just caught the rocket. Like, you know, it's so big and so special. I mean, I love that he caught the rocket. That was the booster. That was incredible yesterday. I love stuff like that.
So anybody that's out there, it could be life advice, business advice. What is your number one advice for them, just in general, whether it be buying a business or just going out there and trying to find a business? What's your number one advice?
Well, believe in yourself. You know, believe in yourself and bet on yourself, right? So when I started this company, I bet on myself. It was my money. I didn't get a loan. It was bootstrap money. I put it together as a 26-year-old, and yeah, maybe it was messy and I rented a space that was too expensive and made some mistakes, and you know, you just still work at it. I did the launch during like when 4 hurricanes went through. That's when I sent out, like, I spent like $1,400, which is a lot of money to me, you know, to like do a huge mail out announcement. And of course it got zero response because you had 4 hurricanes in a row. That was back in 2004. So, you know, just believe in yourself and go for it, and know you might make mistakes, and know you might make enemies, or you might make a lot of friends. And I think if you are true to yourself and you meet people where they're at, they'll meet you where you're at. Not always. Sometimes people will never meet you where you're at. And sometimes I think it's funny when people say, "Oh, people are the same everywhere." And I'm like, really? Have you left your city? Because I'm pretty sure they're not. And you have to sort that out. Just like the guy from Maine was saying the same thing as the guy from West Virginia, but they were saying it in a totally different way. And I had to decipher that and prove to them that that was going on. That was the other thing, is I had to prove it. I think if people look forward too far, it can cause a lot of anxiety, right? And if they look too far back, they don't see how far they've come. They just see the injuries along the way, all the corpses, body parts that have fallen off. And I think getting older is like a real blessing. You know, every birthday I'm like, oh, I'm so happy I made it this far. right? Because if you made it this far, if you've made it over 30, you've had at least one close call, and over 40, a couple more, right? So age, I think, is a benefit. And I think it makes you even funnier, right? Because you get even more stuff to like think about and add to your repertoire. I try and put everything in that lens. And again, for my child, she was studying Mesopotamia, right? And here's where I can get a little inappropriate. And this is like why I'm always, but so, she's studying Mesopotamia. She's like, why do I need to know this? If I have to hear about the Fertile Crescent one more time, I'm just going to scream. I'm like, okay, let's take it back. What if maybe you're just trying to do a joke, right? About Mesopotamia, right? It's just a joke. So my brother came in and on this. So, and what if the joke is just, hey, do you want to smell my Fertile Crescent? Right? And she starts laughing hysterically, right? Hysterically, super inappropriate, right? Super inappropriate. And, but it gave her at least like a different vantage point. I said, here's the thing. If you don't learn things like this, you can't make jokes like that. And that was a good joke. And she agreed. That was a very good joke, right? And she's like, I didn't need 6 weeks. I'm like, okay, maybe you're right about that. But maybe look for what it is they're trying to teach you. They're trying to teach you about the beginning of humanity when they're farming. And they're not just gathering stuff in the wilderness and killing stuff randomly. They're trying to make a plan. This is the seed of them making a plan. Maybe the teacher doesn't teach it that way, but that's the way I'm teaching you. This is when people start to get organized. If you don't have a plan, if you're not organized, you'll never get anywhere. So I guess that's life lesson. Be organized. Keep it funny. Mostly appropriate, but maybe not, because then it's not as good sometimes. And bet on yourself. Like, take the chance of betting on yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that.
If people want to track you down, they want to reach out to you, they want to sell their business, how would they do that?
SMB, Jackie Hirsch on Twitter is always good, or X, SMB, Jackie Hirsch. I'm on LinkedIn, Jackie Hirsch, and I usually respond. I'm not always super fast on the platforms, but sometimes. But that's how you and I connected. I think I made some snarky comment that was quasi inappropriate, and you're like, "Oh, she seems a little bit fun."
That's my favorite thing to do. Yeah. Guys, if you like this episode, share it with a friend, send it around, and we'll see you next time.